Hello, and thanks for joining us for this Psychedelics conference. My name is Jessica Meisman, and today I will be talking about the temple at Burning Man and some of the insights it might have to offer for psychedelic navigation. So I've been working with the temple project at Burning Man starting in 2012, and I've been helping to lead the kitchen crew since 2017. And this project and the opportunity to be a part of a team that's really dedicated to providing a healing space for others has impacted me in more ways than I can convey, especially within the context of this talk. But suffice to say that many of the other members of the crew, I've had my own healing, mystical, and cathartic experiences at the temple that have deeply motivated my desire to provide this space for others. And just to give a little sense of the spectrum of experiences that the temple has helped me process, I've cried for my own abortions. I've prayed for the healing of my closest friend and mentor, and later carried a memorial for that same friend to the temple. And I've also gone to the temple during difficult psychedelic experiences and sought the solace of that space to help me move through what I was processing. And the temple crew has become my family, and it's also absorbed much of my biological family. So here I am at the Temple of the Heart with two of my sisters. And currently I am a student at the University of California, Davis, finishing my bachelor's in psychology with a minor in neuroscience and a minor in religious studies. And I also work in a lab that studies contemplative science and compassion. And I'm deeply interested in the embedded and interconnected nature of our human experience. And I'm currently working on an undergraduate thesis about the temple at Burning Man through a religious studies perspective. And so my academic thinking on the subject is rooted in this perspective, but I'll also be applying a bit of a clinical lens on my talk today. And I want to emphasize that my perspective on the temple is my own. It's based on my experience and research. But it doesn't necessarily reflect the views of the temple crew or the tens of thousands of people who use this space. One of the amazing things about this ritual is the flexible container that it allows so that people can create their own meaning. Here's just a brief map of my talk. I'm going to begin by introducing the temple at Burning Man, talk a little bit about what I think is happening, and then end by how I think it relates to the current services offered for navigating mystical and cathartic experiences. Burning Man is a week-long event in the desert that's focused on community art and self-expression. It started in 1987 in San Francisco and migrated to Nevada in 1991. At the Saturday of the event, this man is burned. And for the week of the event, Burning Man is the third largest city in Nevada. In 2019, there were almost 80,000 people, and it takes place in the Black Rock Desert, which is a dried lake bed. It's full of this dust, which people lovingly refer to as the playa. And I would argue that it's an expression of psychedelic culture. Many people do psychedelics at Burning Man, and there's many prominent psychedelics and thinkers and artists that present out there. So the temple at Burning Man is a chapel-like structure that's dedicated as a sacred space for processing grief, loss, and other difficult emotions. And it's primarily a memorial space. And when I asked the longtime temple builder, Simon Nonstop, what the temple was, he said, "It's the soul of the city, a cleansing point, a restarting point, a place to reflect, a place to let go. No matter the design or the shape of it, it all has the one intention of a space for cherished memories and cherished thoughts and feelings in a safe spot." So every year there's a different temple design, but they're unified in their intention for creating a safe and non-judgmental space for memorializing, honoring, and processing. And it really is, one of the centerpieces of Burning Man, and it's the largest physical structure out there. It's often over 80 feet tall. And it's also the largest collaborative art piece on the playa. Over 100 people are on the build crew, and tens of thousands of participants bring physical offerings and write directly on the structure to create a three-dimensional collage. And it's focused on grief and loss, and it is primarily a memorial space, but it's also a blank canvas. So it provides a flexible ritual and allows people to use it in different ways. And the main active ritual that happens with the temple is that it is burnt. So on the last night of the event, the temple is ceremonially burned as an offering and an opportunity for cathartic release. Um, so the first temple was built in 2000 by David Bess and his crew, and they were already planning to build an art piece at Burning Man, and the week before, their friend died tragically in a motorcycle accident. And they built a piece that they called the Temple of the Mind as a memorial for him, and they invited the community to use the art piece for their own memorializing. And the following year, David and his crew returned to build the Temple of Tears, which they lovingly called the Mausoleum. And the temple has been an integral part of the burning tradition ever since. And importantly, David dedicated the center altar to those who died by suicide. Often organized religion doesn't have, a really good way for people to process this sort of complicated grief. And the temple continues to provide a space for people to process these, complicated grief and honor people that have died by suicide. So people do different things at the temple. They bring physical offerings to those who pass. They write directly on the structure. They process difficult emotions. They write letters to their loved ones who are gone. They play music. They meditate. They dance. They get married. And this space serves a role that is often served by organized religion, but it is a secular space. So it really is a unique example of a secular sacred space. And it's a flexible ritual that allows for different beliefs to coexist and collaborate in a ritual of release. So the temple provides a number of things, but primarily it provides a safe and non-judgmental space where people can bring their pain and loss. It provides a flexible ritual container, an opportunity for collaborative creation, and a physical space to bring physical offerings. This is incredibly important because we are embodied physical people. And so this is a spot where you can bring the shoes of your child that died, or the helmet of your friend that died in a skydiving incident. And it's an embodied ritual, which I think is really important. So this is a psychedelic conference, so just relate temple and the psychedelic experience. A significant number of people within the space are using psychedelics, and the temple itself can mirror elements of the psychedelic experience. It's temporary, only exists for a week. It's distinct from everyday experience. It's awe-inspiring, and it can promote a blending of boundaries and narratives. And I would also argue that the temple can facilitate experiences for people not on substances that share qualities of a psychedelic experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think is happening at the temple. So one of the interesting things is when you walk into the temple, you're surrounded by these intensely emotionally charged writings and artifacts. And it generally inspires a deeply empathetic response in most people. So this is something that I'm calling emotional priming, where reading the writings and offerings of others supports participants to connect with their own deep emotions. And the blend of exposure and anonymity that happens when people leave offerings at the temple can offer participants a feeling of being witnessed in their pain. Another interesting thing that is happening is this idea of blended narratives. So people come to the temple with an individual pain, but they leave it on a collective altar and it's sacrificed in a common fire. And so the experience of emotion in the temple can be in response to a mixture of your pain as well as others. And I would argue that this can encourage a mystical experience of unity. So I really like this definition of mystical experience by Roland Griffiths because it emphasizes the unitive aspect of it, which is this experience of interconnectedness of all things, or a sense that all is one. And this idea of oneness is echoed in different religious perspectives. I do want to acknowledge that a lot of the current scholarship around mystical experiences as they relate to psychedelics are rooted in a perennialist perspective, which might overequate the similarity of ideas across religions. But regardless, this sense of unity is something that is often reported in association with mystical experiences, especially around psychedelics. And it can be measured with less spiritually overt scales, such as the ego dissolution inventory or the Watts connectedness scale. So one of the measures that is used for identifying a mystical experience is the Mystical Experience Questionnaire 30. It has 30 questions, and it's been validated in different ways, and it's widely used. And these are some of the questions that pertain to this idea of mystical unity. But basically, it's an experience of oneness or a fusion of the self into the larger whole. And so mystical experiences are related to psychedelics in a number of different ways. There's the historical context where the mystical framework has been part of the history of psychedelic research since the 50s and 60s. And these mystical experiences have been positively linked with therapeutic outcomes in a number of clinical trials with psychedelics, specifically with the psilocybin clinical trials with Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins, as well as others. And it's really interesting that psychedelics can reliably produce mystical experiences. And some people believe that mystical experiences are a key mechanism of action for the healing that can take place with psychedelics. So I believe that the temple can encourage a unitive mystical experience through this blending of narratives of self and other. And that temple itself can be seen as a bit of a mystical experience. It's temporary and ephemeral in nature, and yet it's able to profoundly impact daily life. So now I want to talk about a little bit about what the temple, what insight it has to offer the world of psychedelic healing. As I said before, there are limitations to psychedelic therapy as it exists in a clinical setting. Unfortunately, it's not accessible to most due to the legal and financial barriers. And it's also missing a communal element. These sessions generally take place with one person and one or two therapists. And it's can be missing a physical or embodied element. The processing that's happened is, primarily verbal and mental. But I do think that the psychedelic community does offer services for navigating mystical and cathartic experiences. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy exists on one end as an intentional healing modality. And then I also think that psychedelic peer support exists as a communal safety net when unintentional cathartic or mystic experiences arise. So just to speak a little bit to what I mean by psychedelic peer support, I'm primarily thinking of Zendo. So they operate at events, and I'm going to read the first part of their mission statement, and they aim to provide a supportive space for guests undergoing difficult psychedelic experiences or other psychological emergencies in order to help turn those experiences into opportunities for learning and personal growth and to reduce the number of drug-related psychiatric hospitalizations. So they really operate as a safety net for people who are having a difficult time. So all of these modalities, including the temple, aim to cultivate a safe space free from judgment, and they encourage participants to move through difficulty rather than avoid it. And they're allowing the participants to steer the direction of the journey, and they're all rooted in compassion. So I'm just going to compare these modalities across a few different dimensions. So psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is highly intentional. People are going into this with something specific that they want to work on. They often have preparatory therapy sessions to prepare them for it. And it's highly curated. Even though the client might be guiding the content of the session is happening in a specific time. In a curated space, the therapists are following a protocol. There's likely a curated musical selection. And unfortunately, as I said before, it's fairly inaccessible for most people. And along these dimensions, Zendo is as far as people using the Zendo, it's a fairly low intention space. So people don't generally start their evening planning on spending it at the Zendo. But this space operates as a safety net for people who might find themselves having a difficult cathartic or mystical experience and not without having the tools to navigate it. And I would argue that it is moderately curated. So while it is open, you can come at any time. You don't have to make an appointment. But once you're there, the volunteer that you're working with will be following a protocol, and the space is designed to kind of create a certain type of experience. Um, and it has an interesting mixed accessibility. It's available in the same context as the temple. It's at Burning Man, and it's also at other festivals where the temple is not. But it's generally for people in a crisis. So it's not really accessible to those who have difficulty asking for help or feel like they're still in control, or who want to process privately. And many, many more people use the temple at Burning Man than use Zendo. So just to situate the temple along these same dimensions, I would argue that it has a mixed intentionality. So some people think about and prepare their offering months in advance, and prepare themselves for the ritual of release of the temple. And others enter and have a spontaneous release prompted by the emotional priming and reading the offerings of others. And I would argue that it's low curation. So people can come in at any time while the temple is open, and the ritual is flexible, so people can engage with it as they see fit. They can process alone, they can talk with their friend, they can cry, they can sing, they can dance. And you can start processing something, leave, return to it later. And it's moderately accessible. It's only at Burning Man, so and a few other places where it's existed in the world. But when it is open, it does serve tens of thousands of people. And when it's open, there's no constraints on when you can use it. You don't have to make an appointment. Yeah, and so there's two ways though that I think that the temple is distinct from the other modalities that I've mentioned that are really important. So the temple is a physical space, and we are physical embodied beings, and bringing tangible artifacts that are imbued with emotion to be physically released in the fire is an embodied ritual that can create a deep release and is not often available to us in other contexts. And the temple also provides a communal and collaborative space. So it brings private pain into a collective space. So it allows for the dark feelings of our souls to be placed in a place of honor, on a beautiful altar, and shared with others, and brought into the light, and then released in the communal flame. And I think this is particularly important in our modern world, where we can often feel so isolated. So all of these different approaches are an important and necessary part of the psychedelic healing space ecology. And they have different pros and cons. So psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is high in safety. So it's really good for people who might have a clinical diagnosis or intense trauma. Psychedelic peer supports operates as an important safety net. And the temple, operates within this space as being highly flexible, and it really allows for people to use it in different ways, and it's particularly communal and embodied. I am so grateful to have this opportunity to speak today, and I deeply believe in the efficacy of the temple as a ritual for embodied and communal healing. And I've had, it's meant a lot to me, and I feel really grateful to be part of the community that continues to bring this offering. And I do think that it has some important lessons for other modalities. And I'm just so grateful for the PsychedelX community and for the opportunity to talk with you all today. Please reach out. My email is jameisman at ucdavis.edu. I am very passionate about this topic. Grateful to be part of the IPN community. Thank you all so much.